hella goofy, that Gaia bullshit. Fucking Gaia. Yeah, I'm getting YouTube Premium here in fucking couple days because I'm not gonna deal with these ads if I'm streaming.
You deserve to.
Thanks, man. Everybody deserves to.
They do.
That's the thing. We have these stories in our head that tell us we don't deserve to be happy. Or maybe we're scared to be happy because if we're really happy, then we might die.
Or you might be really healthy and have no friends.
That's, I think, one of the big fears is we're afraid to enjoy life so much because we're afraid of the contrast of having to let it go. So if we just keep ourselves at a low level of suffering, or maybe sometimes extreme suffering, then if something bad happens, no big deal. I'm already in the shit house anyways.
Yeah.
So nothing to fear.
That's possible. I mean, that sort of way of thinking is so far out of my wheelhouse that I have to use my imagination to wonder what it's like to live that way.
Yeah.
But I if you can imagine it, it's probably happening, so I wouldn't doubt it.
I've seen it, I've seen it in myself. This little voice when I start to get really happy.
Yeah.
It says, don't do it. Just don't fucking do it.
Really?
Don't get too happy. And I have to be like, hello, voice, trying to keep me safe. I understand what you're doing. You're trying to prevent me from having the disappointment in case this, temporal happiness ends.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely the antithesis of the way to live. Because it's denying you the thing that you're trying to protect.
Makes a great catalyst for growth, though, doesn't it?
It does.
So, I mean, all that and any other such negative thing is really just a great opportunity to say, oh, thank you, dear pain teacher, for showing me where I have a mind virus. And then just ask yourself, what is my dream in regard to this? Well, my dream is to have happiness all the time. That's a more positive choice. Let's energize that and create a neural network to support it. And within enough time, you disempower the old network and you create a new one. And all of a sudden, you don't have those thoughts anymore.
That's right.
But it takes the discipline and the awareness to not wait till you're in a funk, but to catch it in its, as it starts talking to you. And,
yeah.
And that's where I really teach the name it, blame it, tame it approach. You say, okay, there's my, I don't want to be too happy because it might come to an end voice. So we'll call it the Grinch that steals happiness. So whenever the Grinch that steals happiness shows up, you say, hello, the Grinch that steals happiness. Thank you for reminding me that I am choosing to live with happiness and joy and trust in the universe. And then you blame it. Whenever the Grinch that steals happiness shows up, I get afraid to be happy and I actually don't enjoy myself near as much. Now you're cognitively aware of what was unconscious. So now it becomes an object instead of a subject.
Right.
And you can't work with it as a subject because there's no way to define it. And then tame it every time it comes up. You just tame it and say, thanks, you're welcome to hang out with us and party or enjoy the sun and the, beautiful beach or whatever, but feel free to visit, but don't pester me anymore. I'm going to have to remove you from my mindscape.
That's the 3-step strategy. That makes a fucking lot of sense. And interestingly, I can apply this to, I recently spent time with a friend and he has a really bad case of tinnitus or tinnitus. How do you
tinnitus?
Tinnitus.
Yeah. Or tinnitus. It's just, garage.
Yeah. And so he's in this constant state where it's very challenging. And, I've never experienced it, so I can only imagine how challenging it is. And there's certain things that he could attempt, but when I was really like getting down to it, there's like, he's a little bit afraid to try the last of the events because
which is what, having his head cut off.
Yeah, right. I don't know. There's some procedures and there's some metaphysical things he could try.
There's actually, I've treated many cases of it and most of it is not accurately diagnosed. One of the key things of tinnitus is nothing changes it, not in volume, not in intensity. So for example, there's many things as a therapist that I know that trigger that. By the way, one of them is dehydration. That's the most common. If you get dehydrated enough, your inner ear fluids get so thick that they won't move properly. And a side effect of that is tinnitus. So whenever I meet someone with tinnitus, I just ask, how much water are you drinking? So far, I've never met anyone that's even drinking close to enough water.
And the right type of water.
Right. And it can very commonly come from upper cervical subluxation, which is the most common subluxation in the human spinal column, due to the fact that the atlas has far greater range of motion and far less ligamentous stability than any other vertebra, because it has to, so you can rotate your head.
Mm.
And there's a technique chiropractors often use where they have a pad on the wall, like a wrestling mat, and they will just gently bounce you off the wall, and that can shock your inner ear enough to get the fluids moving again. I've seen that work for a few people. There's one called the endonasal technique, where they do something. I've had it done to me a few times. It's painful as hell. They take like a condom, and they stuff it up your nose, both sides, and they use a blood pressure cuff, and they inflate it, and it actually opens up your
Yeah, they do that with broken noses for fighters and things.
Yes, but it'll actually put so much pressure through your eardrums, it feels like your eardrum's going to pop, but it can have a resetting effect. And sometimes, due to the misalignment of the facial bones and the cranial bones, that endonasal technique, the few times I had it done, it sounded like someone cracking an egg inside of my head, because it was adjusting the bones so thoroughly. And so there's a number of cases of tinnitus completely clearing up with that. But actual tinnitus is more of like a disease of the eighth cranial nerve, or a degenerative situation. And the hallmark of real tinnitus is that nothing can change it, not chiropractic, not craniosacral, not anything. And so the second question I ask after how much are you drinking is there any time at all, exercising, sleeping, making love, anything, where the intensity of it changes, oscillates up and down, seems like it's less? And if the answer is no, that's usually a real case of tinnitus.
And then you have to go to probably some more metaphysical type of techniques, either like the Dispenza type of technique, where you live in the reality in which you have no tinnitus and allow the great mystery to find a solution to the insolvable problem and manifest it in your physical form by the signals that you're sending, with perhaps the help of plant medicine or something else. Like that becomes the next avenue, right?
Well, yeah, there's other things that you can do, because a lot of the problems that happen to people with these chronic neurodegenerative type changes have to do with their diet and toxicity. And so anything that disturbs the myelin sheath on the nerve can lead to all sorts of these unusual problems like tinnitus. So the first thing I do is run an environmental panel on them for environmental toxicity, and look for things like heavy metals, chemicals from buildings, chemicals from plastics, xenoestrogens, chemicals from cans and can liners. And one of the most common things I find is in women is they're poisoned by their commercial makeup. There's many chemicals in commercial
or their tampons. I mean, there's a fucking enormous amount of toxins in tampons that don't even have to be listed.
And then there's also a lot of food additives that attack the nervous system, unfortunately. I've got a whole book on them. And so really what I do is I clean people out, get their gut healthy, and get them eating high quality fats. And if I find reason to give them key supplementation to support that process, so things that support neurogenesis like lion's mane mushrooms and things like that. But almost always it has to do with some kind of disruption of either of the fat metabolism, and or because the body shuttles toxins into fat to protect the organs, glands, and brain and nervous system. So the more toxic you are, the more toxic fat you have, and therefore you got all these chemicals in the fat. And if a person gets toxic enough, and it go into the fat, the myelin on the nervous system, and it just starts to eat it alive and degenerate it. So in a lot of cases, there's a lot that can be done, but that approach is usually about a 1-year commitment, because nerve regeneration is extremely slow. So having dealt with lots of nerve injuries, you have to be patient, but most people take a year to clean out and learn the new habits they've got to learn, and get them to where they're doing it consistently and enough that you have enough time for the cells of the body to replace themselves with clean, good, and all your cells over. It used to be 7 years over. So I've found with a lot of these types of cases, if you're not in for a year's worth of consistent participation in the therapist program, then you might as well go see what they can cut out or destroy for you.
Well, I'm glad you went down that rabbit hole, because I'm sure there's people listening specifically who can get help from that, and also understanding the conceptual framework about how toxicity can create just a general degradation of the system. But where I was going originally was this idea about, the psychology behind it, because there's some aspect where he wanted to preserve this kernel of hope in that I haven't tried everything, so there's a chance.
Yeah.
However, he didn't want to hope so much and actually go for it and try it because of the fear of having that hope dashed, and then him having to, accept the reality.
That's quite common with people with chronic conditions. Yeah, you get what's called illness behavior, where you actually get so far down the line that you, at a subconscious or conscious level, don't know who you'll be without the problem. And also people get doctor fatigue and therapist fatigue, because they've seen to so many doctors, spent so much money, so much time, and they're not getting any tangible results. So they just basically reach the point where, why friggin' bother? It's just going to be another round of the same crap. I've tried it 28 times. So, I can feel empathy for that, because most of my clients are people that come with 2 medical files about 2 inches thick, and it takes me about $10,000 worth of my time just to look through and see how badly tortured they've been. And, I could go off on a long segue on that, but the reality of it is that you can do the metaphysical type approaches. And of course, me, I'm all about that, but you can pray till the sun turns into the moon if you're still eating crap and poisoning your body, and all you're doing is fucking with God, saying, fix this while I poison myself, would you? It's kind of like, thinking because you did ayahuasca that you're going to be Jesus tomorrow,
Wait, you're not?
Well, you're always Jesus. It's just how many layers between what's on the surface and Jesus hiding inside there is.
Yeah. There's it reminds me, it's also that hope is scary. It's a scary thing, because it's setting you up for the contrast of that disappointment potentially. And there's a Nietzschean interpretation of Pandora's box, the myth of that, which is really Pandora's amphora, because they didn't have boxes back then. But ultimately, they left, in the myth, hope was left in the jar. And there's a lot of interpretations why hope was left in the jar, but Nietzsche's interpretation is that was an act of mercy from the gods, because hope was the most challenging of all the pestilences that could be on man, because everything else, you can accept it. In all suffering, if there's no hope, you just accept your fate. But the moment you have hope, you have the torture of that kind of tension of like, oh man, I hope that this could be different. And so you're in resistance, and resistance is the actual definition of suffering. Otherwise, it's just pain. And we're very good at adapting to pain.
I know there's people that have these sort of dispositions. I mean, because as you know, I'm a therapist and work with all kinds of complicated people, but personally, I've never had anything but a great relationship with. I think the difference between hope and faith is very minimal. Hope, if you have hope, then you have to have faith, or why hope? Right?
Yeah, it's like the active and passive version. I think faith is just like, it's a stronger. Hope is like, I hope, it's putting the power out externally. Faith is like driving that power. Like, I believe, like I'm actively believing this, but it is a subtle difference.
Well, like what if I'm got an airplane coming in late and I got a flight to get on, and what happens, like you're hoping you can make your flight. I say, well, I hope I make my flight, but I also say, thank you, Great Spirit. I have faith that I'll make my flight. And I just used the power of my mind to cause someone to spill something on the other airplane before they could leave the gate. Sorry. Excuse me. But I'm mostly kidding. But, for me, I think because I've been through so much pain in my life and had so many broken bones and internal injuries and bad concussions and just lots of fucking pain that nobody could do anything with. So I had to take it into my own hands, which now I realized God was saying, oh, by the way, you're going to be a therapist one day and you're going to have to learn to figure shit out for yourself because nobody in the medical system is going to give you much help. So I really grew into a relationship where whatever has me, I have found through, I'm 59 now, so I've had time to experiment a lot. I've found that every single thing that really fucking put me down and made me hope I would be able to return to normal, walk, run, jump, play, whatever, turned out to be an amazing journey that not only helped me learn and heal, but gave me all sorts of skills and levels of awareness that ended up being a great gift to countless thousands of people. Help me develop courses and say, look, this is where you can trust the medical evaluation. This is where you shouldn't trust it, and things like that. So I think, a lot of this boils down to people having not enough depth of spiritual awareness and connection, that they don't have a sense of trust in the grand plan of the universe or the world, or they don't have enough understanding of the true nature of God to feel supported in whatever's happening. Right. You had that terrible car accident.
Right.
And I'm sure that was like, oh my God. I mean, I remember seeing videos of you. You were pretty fucking, up against the wall for a bit there. But if you didn't have hope and faith and use your support system and keep your eyes on the target instead of in the pain, you could have turned out to be addicted to pain medications. I mean, that whole situation could have gone many different ways, none of which would have put you right in the seat with me smiling right now. Right. So if we're, and I think that's part of the reason why people like me and you do what we do, and Joe Dispenza and many, many others, Eckhart Tolle, Deepak Chopra, Ram Dass, the list is long, right? In some way, we've all had painful lives and we've all found ways to learn and grow from the pain and actually use it as a catalyst. So eventually you realize you've got a toolkit, and when the darkness shows up or the demons show up, then you say, this isn't fun, but I know what to do. I know who to call. I know what books to look into. I know I can use the internet effectively.
And even if I don't know what to do, the learning, I think this is the key thing you said there, the learning that goes with the trying, and then the ability to share everything that you learned, makes it all productive. Even if it's an absolute fucking dead end, you try something and it's like, nope, that's not it. Well, you can share that and then continue that infinite game for everybody else. Like, this is how I was playing today. This is what I tried. It didn't work, or it did work. And then you share that thing, and then it's just part of that integral consciousness. It's part of believing yourself as part of the whole, rather than it's just me.
Yes.
Like, because everything you do, if it's part of the whole, then it makes sense. It's productive.
Yes.
It's helpful.
I have such a love of freedom, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, that if any kind of anything, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, would be a kind of a different context. But if anything starts choking out my freedom, then I'm highly inspired to get rid of the cage. Like if I have pain or going through, like I've been through a divorce, I'm like, okay, right now I'm falling into a situation either by gotten injured or by my own mind, that I'm losing my own freedom, and I don't want to lose my freedom. So I find whenever anything encroaches on my freedom to authentically express my.
All right, we're going to take a break real quick and get a quick message from our affiliates.
Fucking trash on the internet, making fucking videos, happy birthday and shit. This old fucking fart that drinks every fucking day wants to box me. The question, Monty, could you pass the exam? Are you able to run 3 miles? Or are you going to get knocked out in like 2 seconds? I mean, I don't know, Monty. What do you think? This is the question for you because you're obviously asked me to box you. And I said no first because like you're too old for me. But you kept on pushing it. And now you may get your wish. And I don't know, Monty. I don't know if you want to go MMA, if you want to go regular boxing. What do you want to do here, Monty? Because I guarantee you, Monty, it's going to be 1, 2, and you're going to be out. 1, 2, then out. So, Monty, just in case you don't know how to box, just in case you can't take a hit on the jaw, just in case, get ready. Because it's going to be a quick 1-2 for you, Monty. Quick 1-2. Quick 1-2, Monty, like this. See that, Monty? A quick 1-2, and you are out.
I love that guy. Even though I give him shit here and there.
Myself as a human being and in the world, that's the first priority for me to address. So what I'm saying, so it's clear, is that if we really value freedom, then we know that when the pain teacher comes, we need to be a very good student. And that usually means dropping a lot of the things you've been doing, like staring at televisions and phones and video games and distractions, which is the opposite. Most people drug up and fall deeper into that trap. But to me, it's like, okay, Great Spirit is having fun wrestling with me right now. I'm in a chokehold and I'm going to get out of it. And whatever it takes. But, that adventure has taught me a frickin' lot. And it's led me to, oftentimes, for example, you find traditional medical approaches don't work. This doesn't work. That doesn't work. And the next thing you know, someone says, have you ever tried an Alexander practitioner? And you don't know what that is. And you study FM Alexander and you realize he was an orator and ... So you say, well, let me go give it a try. And then the simplest thing, like little movements and changing your breathing and adjusting your posture, and all of a sudden your tinnitus is gone or your neck pain is gone, and you're like, oh my God, how come nobody knows about Alexander work? And then I say, okay, now that I know, I'm going to put it into the CHEK curriculum, and I'm going to make sure that I know. And so what I did, for example, is I went and got a lot of Alexander, enough to really understand the technique. So I knew intimately from my own experience, when do I refer someone to an Alexander practitioner versus a Feldenkrais practitioner versus a yoga teacher, ... So I teach CHEK professionals on their level 4 test. They have to identify exactly when you refer to 19 different medical and allied healthcare professionals. Because if you don't know that, then someone can get caught in a rabbit hole and then come to the end of the cul-de-sac and believe that's the end of it. When really, until you've actually had enough pain to have to explore a lot of opportunities, you don't realize how big the toolkit is out there.
Yeah. The pain is definitely something that can restrict your freedom. All too often, though, it's the fear.
Yeah.
It's the fear of suffering that is actually the most limiting thing. It's constantly constricting us. It's like a jacket with a cinch that's just getting tighter and tighter, like a corset, and the more we're afraid of suffering in some form or another, the more restricted we are, or afraid of death. And this is we look out in the world. We've both been on airplanes recently, and we're cruising around and watching people react. And some people are real relaxed, and some people are just so bound by their fear of everything that's going on in this COVID world right now, that it's really interesting to see the dichotomy, which is actually physically displayed, not only in their energetic presence, but also in their, armaments.
Yeah. Yeah. But, fear is a necessary complementary opposite to freedom. So because mind operates on the principle of duality, you can't have mind without a duality. And because the nervous system's oriented towards threat for our own survival, our biological systems know what a snake looks like and see it before our conscious mind does, because they know that's a potential threat. But sometimes we think the rope is the snake, as you know. But
I'm not making any New Year's resolutions this year, and here's why. Years ago, I discovered there's a better way to make improvements to your life that's affordable, personalized to you, and realistic. And that's therapy.
the point I'm making is you can't have freedom as a concept without the opposite, limited freedom. And fear is really boils down to anything that stops me from doing the routine that I've convinced myself is what is the way I want to be. So if I'm going to, a lot of people won't race a motorcycle because they're less oriented toward the freedom and the fun of going really fast and more oriented to the fear of a broken leg or a broken neck. Some people won't do anything for that. I remember Michael Jackson was a germaphobe. Like, people were cleaning his limousine constantly and all that stuff. So here's a guy with tremendous freedom on stage, but as soon as he's not in his meditation, all of a sudden the other side of his mind takes over, and there's millions of people. So all I'm saying is, whenever we have a negative polarity like that, that's our invitation to remember that one of the definitions of a spiritual master is someone who can turn a negative into a positive, and we're all seeded with those potentials. It doesn't, just because spiritual masters do it doesn't mean we can't do it. As Jesus said, anything I can do, you can do better. And so what I'm saying is the fear, the pain, the upset, the sadness, the heartbreak, they're things that we need to experience because it makes the spectrum of human existence real and diverse and exciting. As I hate saying it, but pain and all that. Without it, then the other things have no value,
Sure.
right?
We know through contrast.
Right. So I think it takes a certain level of maturation and awareness of how a mind works to get to the point where you actually aren't the victim of the circumstance, but you realize that you now have tools and that it's a catalyst and that it's giving you an opportunity to exercise the capacity of your own mind and to see other viewpoints that normally you wouldn't if you just stopped right there. So because it's biologically driven into us by nature, it takes quite a while for people to get enough psychological maturity to discern a real threat from a perceived threat.
Right.
And that's like a lot of doctors will tell you that you've got such and such a disease, you're going to die. But until you've weighed out your options, that's only a perceived threat, right? And a lot of people weigh out their options and change their diet or heal their relationships, and their tumors disappear. Or they go to holistic health people that give them the right diet and various approaches that almost anybody can do. And the next thing you know, they go back to the doctor 2 months later and they don't have a problem anymore, but the doctor was ready to cut their body open and pull out tumors and give them chemo or whatever. So I think part of it is we have to mature into asking deeply, what are my options and who else has gone through this and recovered from it and how did they go about doing it? And I tell you, if you actually start looking for who's had tinnitus or who's had fibromyalgia or who's had intractable back pain or any such thing and actually recovered from it, it's not hard to find people because usually they go shout off the fucking rooftops, oh, by the way, you don't have to live this way. Here's how you can do it. I mean, I must have 50 books on cancer written by exactly those kinds of people that just couldn't resist telling everybody, oh, by the way, if you get cancer, here's 58 things that you can do that probably will address the issue. And you don't need to think it's the end.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges though, because fear, it limits our ability to think freely and to think, think rationally and explore options. It constricts our freedom to such an extent that we want to place our faith in what we feel is the best option and then close our eyes and ears to any other possibilities. And I think, one of the reasons why that fear is so constrictive is we have this massive fear of death,
Yeah.
which comes from a deep misunderstanding of what death really is. And I think if we're gonna start going down and talk about all the ways that we start to, unfetter ourselves
Yeah.
from the chains that are binding us, you really kind of got to start with death, and you got to understand, like, all right, what is this thing? What is this ceremony called death, as Ram Dass calls it, a ceremony? When you think about death, because you've certainly explored the realms beyond the physical body as much as anybody I know. When you think about death, what do you think about death? Like, what is your feeling about it?
Well, I've spent a lot of time investigating death, and I've been through some profound death experiences, including running into a pile of logs going about 70 miles an hour on a motocross bike that was laying on the side of a logging road that was our racetrack. But the guy ahead of me was kicking up so much dust in the summer that I couldn't see what was in front of me, and he swerved around the logs, and I didn't know they were there, and they were like halfway into the road, and I hit him full on, flat out, as fast as my motorcycle would go, totaled my motorcycle, flew about 50 feet through the air, landed in these logs, had a branch go right through my abdominal wall, and he didn't know what to do. I was maybe 16, he was 18. So he draped me over his CR 125 dirt bike and throttled me home about 2.5 miles down the road. And they had a doctor come in an emergency to look at me and said, "Don't move him. He's in a very deep coma." And so I was completely and utterly gone for probably 2.5 days before I had any signs of conscious life in me. And many times so deep in ceremonies, particularly DMT, that, man, I was like, I didn't even know how I was going to get that so conscious life in me.
Hey, appreciate y'all stopping by. I'm seeing a lot of good faces here. Some of y'all might have missed the Tarek video, but we had a quick little intermission, little public service announcement from our affiliates, our favorite Turkish man. Anyway, yeah, I'm gonna be shutting down here soon, but I'm gonna let this play another like 15 minutes or so. Charles Wise, if you're gonna be going live, bro, drop a link in the chat. And then OTW, if you got something scheduled, I'll go ahead and link that here before we shut down in about 15. We'll end about the hour mark here. So appreciate y'all.
And many times so deep in ceremonies, particularly DMT, that, man, I was like, I didn't even know how I was going to get home. I was like in other dimensions completely and scared to death. I mean, I have actually been so deep. I have found myself laying in my yard crying for my mother, screaming, "Mom, Mom, help, help," because I had entered the abyss and I was in just this vast, vast emptiness and felt like I was moving at the speed of light, and there was just no top and no bottom and no sides. And I thought, fuck, I've just died and I don't know what to do.
Well, you've died. Well, probably actually it's much scarier than died, because I don't think that's not where we all go in my exploration of it. But it is one of the lokas, one of the planes of
that's
existence.
only one experience. There's about 100 more.
Yeah.
But I've actually investigated it not only in my own life, but I've studied it quite extensively. And I put a model together that I teach my HLC 3 students, which is the advanced holistic lifestyle coaching, based on that. But I mean, before I start rattling away, is there something specific you're wanting me to share?
Well,
about
I think, death is a multifaceted, topic of exploration. Right now, I think a lot of people just think of it as the end. And then some
Mhm.
people think of it, oh, well, there's some kind of afterlife of my soul, but I think it's, it's very very loosely understood. And then people just throw their hands up, and there's all kinds of different, facile, kind of aphorisms like, well, you don't know until you do it, and there's
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons why people don't actually explore it and just kind of throw their hands up. But meanwhile, the fear is just breathing down their neck like a wolf that's constantly,
Mhm.
sniffing their artery of life. But there's just, in my own exploration, in my own surrender to
Mhm.
death, which the ceremonies have forced me to do, and also the car accidents and different brushes that I've had with death, there's it's not what people think
No.
in the slightest, and when you really start to understand that death isn't something that is quite so scary. So
Mm-mm.
yeah, I mean, if you want to just go into, your understanding with the best of your capability of what happens when we
Yeah, I
die.
mean, I can share what I've learned, and I have put, potentially thousands of hours of study with many mystics and people like Steiner, and a lot, because it's been an interest of mine for a long time, because I want to know what God is. And if you really want to know what God is, until you really get clear on what that is, you can never understand death or life,
Mm.
because it's the first principle from which our sense of self, soul. You can't have a soul if God doesn't have a consciousness. If God's not conscious, then how could you be conscious? If God is prime source, then there's no quality that can exist anywhere in the universe that doesn't already exist in God, because it's just impossible.
Right.
Right. So for my understanding of all this stuff, and having dialogued and debated and talked about this with people all over the world, I find that people's views of death are almost always a perfect reflection of their beliefs about God. And what is most people's belief? God loves you, but he'll burn you in hell for touching your genitals, and you'll be in there for a long time, and you'll be getting hit with pitchforks and all this other shit, and that's going to be worse than death, and it's purgatory in the Catholic sense. And so you see, well, fuck, no wonder people are scared as fucking hell of death. Like, most people's conception of what happens when you die, and how many people can say, I haven't sinned, and look themselves in the mirror and say that, and and whatever else. It's just like, there's too much baggage around death. And it's been so, even to this fucking day with COVID, death is the ultimate leverage to get people to be afraid enough to do what you want them to do.
Mm.
Right. So death is like the ultimate tool for leveraging people, until you get somebody like a Zen Buddhist monk who can shut his own heart off at will, and Yogananda, who could shut his own heart off at will and die at will. Yogananda said, death is like having 1,000 orgasms at once. And I would agree.
Sounds like 5-MeO.
It does, because the death experiences that I've had, aside from a couple of them where I was just so, what was the scary part was that I felt an obligation to my family,
Right.
and I didn't want to leave them with a lot of load that really is my obligation to handle.
And this feeling of having a purpose and knowing that there's work yet undone.
Yes.
That's when I look at death, because I don't have children or anything. I look and I'd be like, that would be a damn shame, because I'm just fucking getting started.
Exactly.
Like that. I'm not done, damn it.
I've been
learning my whole life, and I got shit to do.
Yes. I've always had a sense of mission since I was 21. Things, just the stars lined up, and I knew why I was here. And then through things like past life regressions with regression therapists, and doing my own inner work and talking to my soul about these things, I'm very, very clear why I'm here, and I know exactly what I'm here to do. So when I get into a situation, be it through plant medicines or any other experience, I'm not ready to go yet. So a lot of the challenge that I have when I get into these situations isn't because I'm afraid to die, it's because I'm afraid to die at that moment.
Right.
But one of the biggest things I think stops people, leaves people in so much fear of death, is that they have not lived yet. Right? I've lived.
Correct.
I've ridden, sexed, drugged, climbed, crawled, soldiered, daddied. I mean, I in 59 years of life, man, I have studied hard, worked hard, played hard. I have not been afraid to explore my sexuality. But, you know, because I need, out of compassion for the people in the world that don't understand the kind of simple things we're talking about, before you go get a bunch of shit stuffed in your head because you got tinnitus, try drinking some quality water for about 3 days. You know, like, the world is so railroad with all this medical fear, right?
Yeah.
And leveraging people and false marketing and manipulation.
The people who
that I feel a deep commitment to the rest of myself, the rest of the people in the world that aren't fortunate enough to have the life path and the experience and the knowledge and the discipline to study that I do. So Steiner says when you die, the first thing that happens is you find yourself bouncing around the universe at the speed of thought until you realize it's you doing the thinking. So what he's saying is, when your body's gone, there's nothing to anchor your mind. So until you learn to control your mind, death is a real ball buster, because it takes a while for that energy to diffuse. Now, then there's a whole bunch of stuff he teaches with planets and cycles and where you go at different stages. And, you know, he attributes different types of what they would attribute to the Bardo and the different stages we go through. He talks about in relationship more of an alchemical approach to you will go here first, the moon, then you'll go here, then you'll go here. And in each stage, you go through a different experience, a different level of awakening, processing, and realization. And then if I remember right, in Steiner's model, once you are to the point where you don't need to live anymore, or you've reached a level of spiritual development where your soul is quite pure, then you end up on the sun. And then if you want to reincarnate from there, you come back into the earth plane. Now, it's been years. There's a great book called At Home in the Universe by Rudolf Steiner, which goes through his whole model of what happens when you die. And there's another great book that I give to people all the time. I think it's called A Guide for the Recently Deceased by, I believe it's David Taub. I haven't read it for many years, but it's such a great book. I give it to anybody who's got a death approaching in the family. But so Steiner has a model that's based on the Rosicrucian model, which is a elite group of Christians, mystic Christians. And then you've got the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and you got the Egyptian books, and you know there's all sorts of models, and there's some parallels and there's some not. What I did, which there's many other things I could say, but just to kind of keep it from wandering everywhere, what I did is I asked fundamental questions like, what are we? Well, it turns out everything in the universe is made of two things: energy and information. And I never forget the day that I heard Stephen Hawking in a lecture say, only two things can escape a black hole: energy.
And this is where I do have to say that, as wise as Paul Chek is, he's in his 60s now. This dude believes we went to the moon and shit. But at the same time, he's a fucking Native American certified medicine man. He has his whole own CHEK Holistic Health Institute. He's helped train some fucking really high level athletes. He's has this crazy life, like he's an epic dude. But I honestly just, in my belief, in my opinion, some people, there's just certain things they don't get to make it on when it comes to the awakening process. Like, this dude believes, we went to the moon, and he doesn't understand like the flat earth stuff, flat plane stuff. He has all this knowledge on everything else. So, it's just about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because there's still a lot of value here. And, you just got to eat the fish and spit out the bones, like I heard Bro Sanchez saying a lot, or any other phrase like that. Sift through and discern and, see what you resonate with. Take the value where you can. And this dude starts talking about Stephen Hawking's like he's some genius and shit. Man, I was listening to Bro Sanchez last night, and Bobby Knight, I hadn't heard him in a while. He was making a joke about Stephen Hawking's and shit. I think a lot of people within the quote unquote truth community, for lack of better words, we got a certain idea, with the Albert Einsteins and the Stephen Hawkings and, black holes, as they tell us. Like, sure, I'm sure there can be things called black holes out there that are pretty crazy, but this whole concept that, we're gonna chart the stars with Elon and shit and all that bull. At least like the Shervine guy that I talk about, that owns that supplement company, at least he knows that we're on a flat plane along with his older brother, David Avocado Wolf of the raw food movement. Those motherfuckers know what's up. And I actually do have Shervine interviewing Paul Chek about Dharma, something we're going to get into one of the other streams. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and play a little more of this. And then Charles Wise is going to be live in like 10 minutes or something now. So everyone be sure to go over there. I pinned the message with the link to his stream that's going to be starting soon. And I am going to continue this in a part 2 later today. If not later today, it would be tomorrow, but I don't see why it wouldn't be later today. I got the time. Yeah. I like to tune into Bro Sanchez when I can, here and there still. I know some people don't really fuck with him anymore, or, whatever things that happened in the past. But, I mean, I know that Sir Drop was on there again. Things seem to be patched up between certain panelists that were, like, regulars there that actually, like, got not kicked out, but there was that beef going on for a while. HOTC, for anyone that knows the lore, it's interesting. But yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna let this play a little longer, and then everyone head over to Charles Waz when I'm done here, and we'll finish this Paul Chek video later today in a part 2. And thanks for y'all that are still here and watching, or people that stopped in, like OTW and others, dropped a like, said something in the chat.
Energy and information. And I said, well, about the worst thing you could do to someone would be to throw them into a black hole based on the old model of a black hole. But really what we are is energy and information. So even the truth of us can't die in a black hole, which is the biggest death force ever found in the universe. Now, new models are showing slightly different things, but I won't segue us into all that because it'd be a long discussion. Fun one, though. There's a great book, by the way, if you really want to read about some good black hole shit. It's called Punk Science Inside the Mind of God by Manjir Samantha Lawton, and it's freaking good.
Cool.
Yeah. So, well, then I say, okay, this body of mine is certainly not all I am. It keeps changing constantly. I mean, every day you look in the mirror, you get the idea that that's Aubrey, but the fact of the matter is your body's really more like a water fountain. I tell people, have you ever gone to a park and seen like a 30-foot water fountain from about 400 meters away? And it looks like a tree of ice, doesn't it? It doesn't even look like it's moving. You just see this white tree standing there. But as you approach, all of a sudden you can see that it's moving. Well, we're moving like a water fountain all the time. We're bringing in new tissue, new cells, fluids, and out with the old, and it's skin sloughing off and bones turning over. You turn over 2 million red blood cells a second. You turn your bone cells over about every 3 weeks. You turn your epidermis over every 3 days. I mean, I've studied this. The body's got a cycle of turning over. So here's the deeper truth. You're fucking dying all the time.
Yeah. And if this is the truth of who we are, what's true is always true. And if that it's always changing.
And
so
death feeds life.
Thing. Right.
You can't have life without death. That's why I tell people who are vegetarians, don't be so worried about killing the chicken. What's more important is bringing the chicken into you as a sacrifice and as a practice of worship, knowing that that chicken is sustaining you So what was a chicken 20 minutes ago now is upgraded to the level of human, and to the degree that you invite the consciousness of that chicken into you, it is not dead. And to the degree that you honor and worship that chicken is giving you the ability to make the world a better place for all living beings now and in the future. The chicken has just upgraded its capacity for service, not only for its own species, but all species, and for humanity, which are the most destructive of all. So really, that's reincarnation with soul added to it. It's, and what are we? If we're a soul, which we are, then when we bring something else into us, we're bringing all of it into us. So the soul, like, why do you think they call alcohol spirits? Because you're drinking the spirit of the fucking plant. It can change the way you see and feel everything. You eat the right cactus, you drink some ayahuasca. It's called vine of the soul, which means vine of death, interestingly. But you're bringing the soul of the plant in you. Now, to be a bit technical, what you're bringing in is the vibration of that organism and the vibration of the molecules that create the organism and the geometrical structures that they come in. But those are actually antenna systems that are in frequency lock with the soul, which is in a non-local domain, which Rupert Sheldrake would refer to as the morphic field. So you could say that's really where the essence is stored, but it's non-local, which means it's everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It's not in a place. So what I'm saying is that as a soul, and we have to be careful about just thinking of soul, because soul has no meaning without spirit. So the way I define what a soul is for people, I use an ancient symbol of the soul, which is a circle with a dot right smack dab in the middle. And this, interestingly, is exactly how a black hole functions. It pulls things into it and it pushes them out of a jet in the center. And all the way back in the 70s, Itzhak Bentov, who wrote Stalking the Wild Pendulum, A Brief Tour of Higher Consciousness, and one other book, said all black holes are coupled with white holes. They are a force of death that gives birth to life constantly. And only now are they starting to explore this with black hole science. And Samantha Lawton talks about this very beautifully in her book. So if you look at that picture, the positive, or the dot, which is a point, which by definition geometrically has no dimension. Like a photon has no mass, that point has no dimension until you create a plane. Now you've got a dimension. If you create another plane, you've got another dimension, right? So when you have a point in the middle of a sphere, Steiner said a soul exists in anywhere where there's an inside and an outside, including an atom. Anything that has shape or form has to have a means of regulating itself so it doesn't just dissolve into entropy, right? So the soul is the intelligence that maintains the shape or the form. And if you look at Bentov's writing, he calls the soul of a bottle a diva, or the soul of the table a diva. And this is, many of the ancient philosophies had this, even aspects of paganism.
Right. Real animist philosophy.
Yes, it's an animist philosophy. So the point is, you have the point in the middle, which is the emergence of something.
I love the fact that HelloFresh always send me something different.
My bad, y'all. But yeah, I really liked what he was saying there as well about animism. Because to be completely honest, overall, all my psychedelic experiences I've had over time, that's been a big theme that's come back time and time again, especially with DMT, is that literally everything has like a spiritual essence to it. On the spiritual level, or quote unquote higher dimensional planes, everything does have a soul of some sorts, even the inanimate objects. So this is why in like fantasy games, there's elementals, fire elementals, water elementals, forest elementals, ice, because there are spiritual forms of all things, even the things that we would assume to be inanimate, or unalive per se. All right, I'm just gonna let this play a couple minutes longer, and then we're gonna shut down. Make sure to go over to Charles Wise. He's probably starting up any minute now.
Right? If you start a drawing, I give you an empty canvas. The instant your brush touches that canvas, you've got a point. And from there, the whole thing begins. So there's the emergence. That's the principle of yang. Or in David Bohm's model, that's the beginning of the explicate. But if you have a circle with no dot in it, then everything is enfolded. It's invisible, but it's there. So that's the implicate order.
Yeah, pure potential.
So when you put the dot in the middle to represent the positive, now you have a body, Aubrey, you now have a field. And by definitions in science and physics, a field is a place of action. So the soul is responsible for the flow of energy and information, and the soul is what's experiencing it all. So thinking is spirit, and feeling what you're thinking and how you respond to your thoughts is soul. How you feel about your friend's tinnitus or your mother's cancer or your divorce, that's the domain of soul. But when you're having feelings, you're also thinking about them. So spirit and soul are like the heads and the tails of a coin. You take the heads off of a coin, it's got no purchase power. You take tails off a coin, it's got no purchase power. But if you don't have something between heads and tails that's completely neutral, unconditional love or God, then those two collapse into each other and you've got no purchase power. So what makes the soul a dynamic principle of life is the fact that it has the feminine and the masculine. And the circle is a sphere which represents geometrically wholeness, and it is also a symbol for God. And if you say, what is death? Well, look at this. If you have a circle, and I ask you, where does it begin and where does it end? You can't answer that. Okay? But if you take the circle, split it in half, and draw it as a sine wave, you can call this life, the positive, and this negative, death. And you can worship those as separate, but what you've just done is named two halves of a circle and created the illusion that the circle is broken.
And truncated an infinite sine wave of life and death and a
Well,
cycle.
and the truth of it is because God is wholeness,
It's an infinity symbol.
you're only aware of what's happening in life, but you are not aware of all the parts of you dying every second that we talked about.
Right.
And when you're dead, you're not aware that you're actually just as alive as you ever were until you awaken to the fact, and that's what spiritual practice is for. Steiner says very specifically, the function of spiritual practice is to develop the subtle body copies of each of your glands and organs that create consciousness in your physical body, in your light body. So it's only through working to see what's seeing. Right? Aubrey's looking at me right now, but the question is, who's actually seeing what he's seeing? Aubrey's hearing me right now, but who's actually listening to the vibrations inside of his ear? You get the point? Like, you're hearing me, but you can be hearing from a physical level and think I hear Paul. But I say, Aubrey, who's actually listening in there?
Is it the ultimate listener, the capital L listener, the
Yes.
capital A awareness, the
Who's
unborn,
actually
the
feeling?
undying? Yep.
Who's tasting, right? And so what you see, like, I'm clairvoyant. So if I want to, I can go into what's called second sight or shift my perception and read your energy field. But I don't walk around doing that because I have to look at everybody's dirty laundry and then I have to sit there and be amazed with all the things. So I actually just use that when I'm trying to help somebody or investigate something. But what Steiner was teaching and what many of the mystics teach is that when you meditate deeply on a topic like death, you might start having images. When we question deeply, what's happening when I dream? How is that happening? And most people I know have had dreams that were so real that when they woke up, it seemed less real than the intensity of the dream they were just having. And some of them were dreaming that they were dying and they were scared to death and woke up frickin' sweating from head to toe. And others have dreams so real that they orgasm in their dream. Now, if you can orgasm in a dream, if you can keep doing that, it's a lot cheaper than marriage. But the point I'm making is Is the person in the dream alive or dead?
Before I discovered Riverside, I avoided online podcast interviews at
It's in that it's kind of in that interstitial place where people don't know,
Right.
because people associate the body with life,
Right.
and the consciousness with a byproduct of life that's somewhere non-local. But some people fix it to the brain, so they would
Right.
say it's life. Some people say no, this is part of the consciousness, it's part of the non-local that always exists.
Mhm.
So but dreams are kind of somewhere in that middle range for most people.
Okay, and how many times have you been in a deep medicine ceremony where you're having experiences that are so damn vivid, so intensely real, that when you come out of it, it feels like this is actually more the sleepy realm?
Oh, many times, and that's where my own understanding of death has come from. You know, it comes from the place of truth, the gnosis, the knowing
Yeah.
of having traversed. So my death, I don't know if I ever told you about this, but I had actually a non-plant medicine derived death experience where I was actually lying in between two people. Actually, interestingly, one of them is my wife, but we were at Burning Man and we were just resting. They were on strong psilocybin at the time. I was sober. I was my rest day, and they were, journeying deeply, and I was lying between them, and it was like two poles of a battery, and I was in the middle, and I journeyed to a place that I knew was the death realm. And in the death realm, everything was just pure black potentiality. It was in this absolute void, in the darkness. But every thought that I had would appear to me. I didn't have to there was no traveling. It just instantly manifested. So if I had a thought, it would instantly manifest. If I wanted to talk to someone's soul, it would instantly manifest.
That's
and there we had a
exactly,
vivid discussion.
by the way, that's exactly the characteristics of the astral realm. And that's the
Right.
first place you go when you die.
Right. And so interesting, I was there and it was this beautiful experience, but I also felt that there was a second death, and I've called it that. And the second death was to dissolve completely. So the recognition of self, the one who was talking, because I still was me, I was still talking to the souls there. I was still choosing with my own will what images I wanted to perceive. If I wanted to see a rainbow over a waterfall, I could see it and it would be beautiful and vivid. If I wanted to talk, I had choice and I had personality and I had a lot of things, but there was this calling and I could feel it. And it was like, you could let this all go and go back to the unicity as the second death. And maybe there's multiple deaths in between those two.
I'll get into that when you're ready.
All right, Charles WOAH is live. Everyone head over there, and we're going to continue this video later today, so I appreciate y'all. Be blessed, and head over to Charles WOAH. Peace.